everyone. Thank you for joining. We are about to start, but we will just wait a few seconds for everyone who's in the waiting room to join us. We had over 100 signups for this meeting, so it's take a second. Okay. I think there's still more people who will join over the next 2 minutes. We will just let them in as they come. I will nevertheless start this webinar. Thank you very much for joining. Thanks for your interest in this study, in this report that we published at the end of April, measuring circular impact, which is the result of a one-year program. I will talk about that in a second. Let me just inform you that we are recording this session, and I would like to ask you to stay muted throughout the presentation. Of course, when we come to the discussion or Q&A, you are very welcome to unmute yourself to ask a question. In the meantime, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We will be looking out for them and call you up on the right moment to ask your question. What we will be doing today is, after a brief introduction to circularity and the report, which I will present to give you an overview of the methodology and the findings of our study, we will have a panel discussion with 3 representatives from companies who are very interested in this work and are doing work on similar topics. So we have Stefan from Panasonic, James from Lenovo, and Marvin, who's representing World Business Council for Sustainable Development. As many of you know, the WBCSD published the CTI, the Circular Transition Indicator, so a very similar topic. So let's get started. I will briefly present circularity. So we are the do tank for the circular economy. We are acting as a strategic partner for companies who are developing solutions, and we initiate cooperations to put these solutions to practice. We are doing this in a wide range of different formats. Have worked since 2018 with a number of strategic and operational partners from different industries, and launched many different programs in various sectors, such as electronics, but are also active in automotive and construction, in chemicals and packaging, etc. We have a range of experts on our team, so we're about 20 active members, and are working on very deep tech and functional expertise topics that are particular to circular economy transformations, as you know. So one of the programs that we have been running since 2022 is our program CCEL, so Circular Consumer Electronics, which is essentially an industry program that serves to network, to build knowledge, and to develop solutions. As a core of this program are workshops with industry practitioners. Just like in February, we had a workshop on repair topics for consumer electronics with 50 representatives of different companies, and worked on a number of topics. And actually the program that we talk about today, and which the report resulted from, UNDRESS Circularity is the name of the project, was the result of such a workshop that we had in January 2023. And we are now in the process of launching another sprint, another round around topics of material recovery and recycling, which will start in the next couple of weeks. So if this is something that is close to your heart, then please reach out and get in touch. But now it's all about measuring impact for circular business models in consumer electronics, as an example. And this has been a topic that was close to the heart to 12 different industry partners in 2023 and has been ever since, and that we worked on quite intensively over the last couple of months. So why do we need a new methodology for impact assessment? I just want to launch a very brief questionnaire to you. So please please answer this question if you can in a second now, just to have get a feeling for who has actually started to or tried to measure impact of a circular business model in the audience. It's interesting. So we're seeing about 30% who say yes and about 65% who say no. Still moving. Oh, it's getting closer and closer to a 50-50 distribution. I will show you the results. It's actually 40-60, so very interesting. So it means that many of you have already faced some of these challenges that I want to talk about, which are that in the first place, actually, there are no common standards for measuring impact of circular business models. There's no such thing as a defined baseline or methodology for how to go about that and how to do the calculation. We often see that the approaches that companies choose do not take into account more systemic effects. So to really answer the question whether the business model leads actually to less or more consumption in the market, you would need to include consumer behavior, and that is often neglected. We also see that there's very little data available. So this is a challenge we also faced and that we tried to tackle by launching detailed customer surveys, consumer surveys, both in the B2C and the B2B sector. And in the end, it's also not quite, let's say, standardized or aligned how to communicate this impact and how to evaluate or how to interpret the results. And this uncertainty actually has an impact on a number of stakeholders, not only on businesses who face the challenge of credibly reporting their own impact, but also on investors who are struggling to compare different business models when they make investment decisions, policymakers who need to basically design the framing conditions for such business models to strive. How will they know which business models will be the most impactful ones if this can't be measured accurately? And of course, consumers who may want to know whether their purchasing decision is a more impactful one compared to other options that they had initially. This evaluation is quite complicated, and if they are faced with information or claims that are not standardized, it's of course not very engaging, not very of trust. So this is what this project set out to solve. And the project, just to summarize its setup, consisted of 12 industry partners coming together to share data from their operations, share some funding, and then be supported by 2 strategic partners. That was the German Foundation for the Environment, DBU, and Deloitte, to develop a methodology how to assess the impact of circular business models. This project was entirely orchestrated and led by Circularity in support of Systemic and the Fraunhofer Institute. And we engaged also several associated stakeholders from research, from industry associations, from normation bodies, but also other NGOs to get their perspectives, to connect to ongoing research and ongoing work in the field, and make sure that our results were really compatible with those ongoing efforts. So the aim was to develop this aligned methodology, include real-world data, and also propose a practitioner guide on how to apply this methodology. And this is essentially what I will be focusing on now in the industry report, which was published a couple of weeks ago. We published a systems map on the case study for electronics. We proposed this methodology and introduced a step-by-step guide. and then also show some results of our assessment of circular consumer electronics. Just to start with this industry system map, what we see is that the industry actually is quite simple when we look only at the linear case, the traditional operation model of this industry, where the products are distributed, used, and then at the end discarded. As soon as we start to look at more circular cases, so for example, second-hand sale of devices, we have additional processes, additional steps that come to the system and that complicate the entire picture, such as grading, refurbishment, resale operations, etc. And this first loop is, of course, quite, let's say, relatively intuitive. But what most people ignore is that these elements from import and export, for example, are critical enablers for that system to work. And I will come to that in a second. We have a particular focus also on that in the report. When you look at rental or product as a service models, the picture becomes even more complicated because you have to take into account an additional use phase, which is different from the ownership use phase, but now is called a rental use phase. And we have additional processes there to make sure that this rental system actually works. So the rental cycle is also connected to the second-hand cycle, which is something most people don't talk about so much, but which is a critical enabler for the impact actually of this business model, which is that most of these rental devices after their rental cycles are sold to second-hand users. And if this wasn't the case, the model would be a lot less sustainable than it actually is. So this is something that is interesting to look at in detail in the report to understand how these processes intertwine, how these actors work together, and who is actually involved in that. And as I said, we were lucky to partner with CCS to provide some insights into the international markets for second-hand devices and how those are developing, which are also very fascinating insights into the that help to understand how the second-hand system or the second-hand business model can actually operate and how the international flow of devices enables it. So I just want to highlight a couple of aspects of this methodology that we presented in the report. One is that we focus on the use phase and include effects on the consumer behavior. So we don't just base our calculations on assumptions, for example, from OEM product sheets, etc., but we really include actual use times, actual decision criteria, etc., that determine the use phase, the length of the use phase, and also the probability of the use phase. And that also includes rebound effects. So if, for example, a certain business model or usage pattern leads to increasing consumption rather than decreasing it or prolonging lifetime, then we can also take that into account in this model. And the second one is that we are taking this, or calculating the impact. And in our example, we chose global warming potential, so expressed here as CO2 emissions, as an impact that we calculate for each at each process step in the lifetime of a device. And we normalize it by the active use time, so by the time that the device is actually used. And doing that means that we are incentivizing decisions even early on in the lifetime of the device that will in the end lead to impact and additional lifetime maybe later during the product life. This may sound all very complicated, and if you didn't in detail understand the two last slides, I don't take it personally. These are extracts from the report. In the report, you will find a very detailed step-by-step guide that will explain how to use this methodology and how to actually interpret the results. It also explains all the features of the methodology. So I just want to point you at that if you want to know more, or of course, please get in touch and ask us directly. What I do want to present very briefly, though, is are a couple of results that we obtained from assessing the consumer electronics industry in Germany. We gathered quite a lot of data on that industry and the user behavior through surveys, both in the B2C and in the B2B sector. We focused on 4 device types, so smartphones, laptops, as devices that are used frequently, and to contrast that with gaming consoles and cameras, devices that are used less frequently. And this means we can investigate effects on different usage patterns. We use Germany as a case market, but likely the results of this are quite transferable to other markets as well. And we are actually working on extending the database and the applicability of the model both to other geographies as well as other product types, also beyond electronics. So when you look at smartphones, for example, and this graph, again, is a bit complicated. I will just highlight a couple of points. What you see here are 2 columns, one for B2C and one for B2B. And in each column, you see the active use time. So by how much the device use is actually increased through the respective business model. And you see the global warming potential per year. This is this normalized indicator, which helps to understand by how much the emissions of the device are actually mitigated when we use the device for longer through this respective business model. What we see is that we can easily achieve 20 to 30% lifetime prolongation or active use time increase. We also see that, especially in B2B, there's quite a high potential because companies tend to use the devices longer than private owners. And less devices from the B2B volumes of devices are currently actually resold to other users. So there's quite a high potential there to increase active use of devices from the B2B pool of devices. For another type of device, so gaming consoles, we see that the rental model actually has a spike. So there's quite a lot of there's quite a significant increase in active use time here, and this is due to the intensification of the use from in the rental model, which means that the device is actually being used by a rental user, given back when that person doesn't need the device anymore, and can then be rented by a second or third user instead of sitting on the shelf of that first user who may only need it for a couple of weeks per year. So this is a very strong effect for especially for less frequently used devices, and leads to a significant decrease in global warming potential per year of about 20% compared to the baseline, which is a linear scenario. In this methodology, we can also aggregate these results to market level, which led us to some conclusions on the German market, for example, where if we want to assume a higher adoption rate for these circular business models, to something about 80% of the market. So we calculated here with 30% rental and 50% secondhand, and only 20% of users staying in a purely linear model. Then we could save about 200,000 tons CO2 per year and reduce the number of new devices that we have to put on the market every year in order to keep satisfying the demand by 2 to 3 million devices per year. So these are quite significant numbers, and if you use the model, I invite you to play around with that and test how significantly your business model can contribute to that. We also looked at a second type of analysis, which you may have noticed in the previous slides, there was also always a theoretical limit indicated at the bottom. And this actually is based on the assumption that devices can only live for so long. They have a technical limit for their lifetime. And if business models achieve a prolongation of active use to that technical limit, then the business model has done its job, right? Then it has achieved, let's say, 100% of its theoretical limit. It cannot tackle the total emissions of the product to zero. That's not possible just by increasing active use. So we measured to what extent these different business models actually achieve their contribution to that theoretical limit, and came to a conclusion of something between 20 and 50%. And that means that operationally, and from, let's say, the way these business models currently work in the market, there still is quite a lot of potential to increase their impact. It also means that we have to tackle other parts of the product life cycle, such as product design or recycling or other more production-related emissions in order to really reduce the total emissions to zero. With that, I want to close that part of the presentation. I invite you to download those reports. You can find the QR codes here and read them in detail on your own time if you haven't done yet. Here are just a couple of highlights that you can take home with you. So the main difference or the main contribution of this methodology is that we account for changes in the use phase and complement thereby other frameworks and standards that are already out there. And that we allocate these emissions or impacts. For that matter, we could have chosen waste generation or material consumption or water consumption, etc. This was a choice we made here, but the method works equally well with these other metrics. So to allocate these metrics over the entire active use time of the device. When we look at electronics as a case study, we see that there's room for optimization, that the models currently achieve 20 to 50% of that theoretical impact, and that we could, in Germany, for example, reduce emissions by 200,000 tons CO2 and 2 to 3 million new smartphones per year. So if this is interesting to you and you would like to know more, then please reach out to us. We are also very happy to look at your case specifically, to adapt the methodology to your specific situation, your parameters, etc. And have a look at the impact of your business model, or to identify levers of how to improve the business model. With that, I would like to open the floor for questions, if there are any immediate questions. I haven't in the chat, but
the question that I put also in the chat. You said you also looked at laptops, not only phones.
Yes, exactly. We looked at 4 different device types. So I didn't present any laptop analysis here. But if you want to know more about that, please get in touch.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I mean, Martin, of course, if there's a particular question that you urgently want to ask regarding laptops, then please do. Yeah. There are some other questions coming up there. Have you thought about how to measure circular impact in the specific context of LCA calculation? So, of course, we are aware of a number of efforts how to optimize LCA calculations, also to take into account more aspects of the use phase. Actually, we believe that what we propose here is very complementary to any LCA method, because all we do is basically double click on the use phase. So any emissions and calculations done for previous or later phases in the product life, we don't really touch them. But anyone who does LCA analysis for life cycles of electronic devices or any other products for that matter, that experience some kind of a circular business model could be enriched with this consideration of our methodology. So to really look at the use phase and take into account specific use phase parameters. Which results were most unexpected by you? Well, I think one thing that I personally find quite important, let's say, and to some extent I didn't expect that, is that these business models already fulfill quite a high share, 20 to 50% of the total theoretical potential. And that means that the lifetime prolongation is really working, which is, I think, a very strong motivator for increasing the adoption of these business models. What I didn't expect was that in the business sector, so B2B, that these lifetimes were actually longer than in the B2C. For smartphones, at least, and for laptops as well.
I think also, I mean, we have been working on the topic for quite some time. So of course, you get to align your expectations with your work. So not the results are probably not as unexpected for us, but I think in general in our journey, what I find interesting is that that there's so much also impact potential in B2B, which is only partly unlocked. I mean, in general, it's only partly unlocked, but that these business models can be particularly powerful in B2B contexts. And I think, and this goes more in general of how we look on these models, is the relevance of the third and the fourth cycle, let's say, right? And we've put a lot of emphasis, and this is also why we built this whole industry systems map, and we've included the deep dive into international trade, because in this common discussion on these business models, these tend to be neglected. So we talk about the first cycle and getting devices from the first into the second cycle, but there's less discussion about what happens at the end of the second cycle, or what happens if these devices are not like redeployed in my immediate surroundings, right? So actually international trade plays quite a big role, and from a market efficiency point of view, that would be also fine, right? If there's more demand for a second-hand device currently in France and than in Germany, then it makes sense to export it to France and to have international trade of used devices as well, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of data missing, and this is what probably like a result, a learning from the report about like how much data is missing on devices. Like, I mean, we have a collection rate of devices of 30% in Germany, which means basically 70% of devices get lost, and nobody knows anything about these devices. And that is something we should, well, be also working on. Like we have also discussed a lot with the different EPR systems or think tanks or government officials, or it is also, of course, also a topic for the European Union and stuff, because if we don't know where the devices end up, we can also not estimate the impact, right? And I think this is also important, and then also like how these business models are linked, right? I mean, typically we say renting, for example, is a great circular business model because it aligns the incentives of the OEM with the use, with the circularity, that through a rental model an OEM would have the incentive to produce a long-lasting device. But what we see is that devices are typically not rented out by the OEM, or seldomly so, or I mean, now we have two OEMs, let's see about the discussion. But like Grover or Everphone, CHG or so, this is like professional renting companies that are renting this out. And second, almost always rented devices are then sold to the e-commerce market, right? In 95%. There's only like very few devices that go from renting to recycling. So it's always like this combination of the model that you have to take into consideration. So whether or not the whole rental model has an impact always also depends on what is happening to the device after the rental cycle is over. And I think in many cases or many discussions, this is a little oversimplified, that we don't look so much into this secondary or third options.
We have two more questions. I just want to briefly, because it goes on to the same topic.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by the results? Charlene, you expected a higher difference, bigger difference between second-hand and new. So I totally understand. One thing to take into account is that in comparison to other results that you may have also in mind when you compare our results, in many other studies, people use the so-called cut-off method, which means that for the second-hand electronic device, they attributed only the emissions occurring as part of that second life cycle. So essentially the emissions due to refurbishment and resale, and completely cut them off all the emissions due to the previous life cycle. And this is exactly what we don't do. We allocate the entire emissions of the entire life of the product to the entire active use time of the product, and thereby average out the second and the first and the second use phase. And that's why maybe you're surprised by the difference. We will discuss that in a second in the panel discussion, but I think this is it's a very interesting topic to delve on a little bit, because it's an important difference between our methodology and other frameworks out there. Yeah, and then just one final point on Theo's question: do we feel like there's more willingness from industry players to collaborate and share data together to build common standards? Actually, I don't know if it has increased significantly. We have been doing this program CSAIL for 3 years now. And we just in February had again a very animated discussion with 55 representatives from nearly 50 different companies, all coming to Berlin for a 2-day workshop to tackle topics around repair. And we feel like this program has really sparked a lot of interest. I'm also looking forward, maybe Martin will have perspective on that at WBCSD. Where currently the Circular Electronic Partnership is still hosted. So I think we definitely have a strong willingness that we see out there. Okay. With that, yes, let's move on to the panelists.
Yeah, it's not the end of the discussion, it's the beginning of discussion, but and we've invited 3 really cool speakers to also like put what Paul just presented into the practitioner context, although it has been developed already with practitioners. So really happy to start to kick off the panel debate. I think for those who don't know me, I'm Marianne. I'm also one of the co-founders of Circularity and was also deeply involved in the UNDRESS project together with Paul. It's always nice to have an engaging discussion. We know if you have attended webinars before from Circularity, you know that we always like a discussion, also where there's an active involvement from your side. So by all means, it would be lovely if you could change your name and add your company organization so that it makes it a little bit more attractive and we see like who's here with us. Yeah, and then I'm super excited to be presenting 3 panelists today. And we'll start like with a short statement from each of them on their perspective on the study, and we have a few questions prepared. But we really like a panel discussion to be a discussion. So if you have points to raise, comments to make, questions to ask, there will be time to do that. So we have with us James Pennington from Lenovo, Marvin Henry from WBCSD, and Stefan Fettig from Panasonic. Is super exciting, and I think it's best if each of you present yourself a little bit, like what is the perspective from where are you looking at this work that we've been doing? What's your personal connection with this? Yeah, and then we can jump into the questions. So James, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So nice, good to meet everyone. My name's James Pennington. I lead our overall our sustainability services at Lenovo, responsible for the overall strategy and vision for our customer-facing services. The majority of which, or a large proportion of that, are circular economy related. So we focus primarily on the B2B sector, although we have a large consumer business. And we help our customers with circular business models, including being able to sell, OEM guaranteed, recertified, refurbished products to customers, including being able to extend life by taking customers' devices, taking their fleet of laptops, refurbishing them, giving them a new cosmetically, giving them more RAM, giving them a new battery if needed, and then giving them back with a new warranty. So really extending the life. And then at the end of life, taking those and refurbishing and recycling them if needed. So with all of those services, obviously the way we measure that is incredibly important, because really what we help our customers with is helping them to cut cost out of their business, of course, because there's cost advantages to doing this, but very importantly, help them meet their sustainability targets around circular economy and around climate. So how we measure that and how we get the right assurance around that, and how we tell our customers and speak to our customers about that is incredibly important. So it's great to be here today.
Thank you very much. Stefan, do you want to go on?
Thank you very much. My name is Stefan Fertig. My affiliation is Panasonic. We are a global Japanese manufacturing company. We are active in the B2C, but also B2B area. Of course, we are a Japanese company, primarily active in the Asian region, but most of our consumer products on the European market are also very well appreciated by our customers. We think that circular economy is a major driver to also make the manufacturing space much more sustainable and also engage in a more sustainable way for doing business. And here we have major perspective that it has a major impact for the raw material use when you develop new products, but also especially after you have launched your product on the market, to maintain contact to your customers and also maintain some of the data will make the business much more sustainable and also more specific for your customers in the local regions. And we are active in some of the battery activities. We have been supporting the DPP for the battery passport, because we are also active in automotive value chain. And we really appreciate the effort, which is also pushed forward by the consumer industry, which is maybe the most challenging environment, because know your customer is a big challenge for consumer. But in principle, I guess moving forward and making some metrics is extremely important to establish some sustainable business. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefan. Marvin.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also hello everybody from my side. Congrats also Marianne, Paul and team for getting this report out. I'm really curious to learn more today and also in the coming weeks. I'm Marvin, director from the climate action team at WBCSD. Where I'm leading the work now on avoided emissions, intervention-based impact assessment. So I think the intervention-based part probably is the one that triggers the most thinking when it comes to circularity, right? Where we're coming from an inventory perspective in impact assessment overall, right? I compare my annual footprints and try to reduce them, which is relatively established, but the space of intervention. So what could be the impact that my products and services have in the market, compared not necessarily to a historic baseline, but compared to a counterfactual, to a reference scenario, right? Which I understood you also did in this report, is an area that we really believe where a lot of value can lie in understanding organizations' ability to contribute to solving climate challenges, while of course not forgetting the inventory responsibility in terms of reducing their own footprint, right? And I think there are a lot of questions to figure out in this, also in terms of the interrelationship, scope 3 downstream, probably an important topic here, but overall trying to understand what are opportunities and growth trajectories, which solutions should I scale in which regions, and how do I assess that impact compared to this risk and reduction dominated narrative or perspective in climate action or sustainability action is really where we are headed with our work on avoid emissions in particular, and luckily see also now ISOs, GHGPs, and others, building on that, picking that up more and more. So yeah, happy to engage on that discussion. On a personal note, since you also asked that, Marianne, yeah, I spent most of my scientific past basically in circularity, circular startups, but also circular impact assessment. So there's also a bit of a yeah, personal passion to this topic, and maybe also needs you to put a hold on me if I get carried away on any of those pieces that I'm not allowed
I
to
might
talk
get
anymore
carried
in
away
my,
with
in my
you.
current role. No, but yeah, maybe that's for starters. Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing with all of you now.
Yeah, really cool. So as I said before, like if you have questions and some of you are already doing it, feel free to put them in the chat. Paul will look at it, but we also can open the floor later if you want to take also raise your question personally or share some insights from your own organization. By all means. But James, I find it well, I recall like several discussions that we've had over the last, let's say, 2 years about this topic of how do we measure the impact for rental models, for example, or e-commerce models. And you mentioned briefly already that you want to provide your customers not only with the opportunity to have like better value, smarter services for IT services, but also like provide them a better environmental service. But I think it's still nice to understand a little bit more, like if you can talk a little bit more about like what is it that you're doing specifically, or what's your offering, and what is your experience with measuring impact on that, and like why have you gotten into this, or like what are the most important drivers for you to measure the impact, and what was probably most challenging about it?
Yeah, no, great. Yes, I mean, I sort of went through some of our services, right? So it's kind of full life cycle circular economy services. And I think, just to give you one of the challenges that we might have with measurement, where I think this methodology really comes in handy. So if you think about our refurbished service, so our refurbished service is when we take your fleet of laptops from a company, from a big partner of ours. We refurbish them, we bring them back good as new with a OEM guaranteed warranty, with an OEM battery, a new battery with any cosmetically as new, a kind of full refurbished process. And normally we do that around the time they'd be running out of warranty, so sort of 3 or 4 year mark, and then they can come back and have another sort of 3-4 year warranty. So it's a really great opportunity to extend life. But if you look at a traditional LCA and you look at the cutoff method, that doesn't necessarily look as attractive as if we were to sell that company a secondhand refurbished laptop from another company, right? Where they've already kind of taken some of the hit on the emissions essentially because it's staying within the same company. So I think the report with the having that metric based around use, I think is a really good look forward, and I think it's a really important contribution to sort of the whole conversation around circular economy, which most of us on this call have been in this for a while and have seen that kind of change over the years. And I think more and more additions to that, we're getting much better about not just being able to sort of talk the benefits of circular economy but really be able to demonstrate what the impact is and be very granular around that. So I think it's really important. In terms of what we've been doing around measurement and what's been motivating us, one of the things we've done is we've launched a tool called LISA, which is a long acronym, but it's our pre-sales tool. So what we can do is if a customer's buying, say, a certain set of devices, we can kind of load that into the tool. And if they want to add any of the circular services, like for instance, they want to extend the life, they want to buy refurbished devices, they want to move to devices as a service, we can then model what we expect some of the carbon impact of that to be. And then also we have an AI platform that goes alongside that as well, which is kind of more of an advisor based on that data. But that's a sort of large data model based on GHG product protocol and using some of our data. So I think that's where we are now, very much in the pre-sales time. I think what we're really looking at now is more post-sales. So really giving customers that assurance that when they bought that product or that service, this is the actual saving that they've made in terms of their CO2. And I think it's important when you look at some of our customers, particularly companies where people are predominantly in offices, using laptops, maybe traveling, we do see IT emissions being up to 30-40% of the company's emissions. So it's definitely something where companies do need to focus and are focusing. And circular economy is really when you look at all of the different interventions that you can put in place, that really is the most effective thing you can do. And I think this study shows it. I really like the statistic that just those life cycle changes can cut the emissions by up to 47% in terms of this methodology, which I think is in line with what we see. So I think that I won't go too long, so I want the other panelists to come in, but that's sort of a bit of an overview of where we see this and where we are.
Mhm. Yeah, super cool. Okay, I stopped myself from asking too many questions. I think we have still some time. But Marvin, it would be lovely also to have your perspective on this approach that we have chosen on the use phase, as James said, and maybe also because this is, I think, probably also a question close to a lot of people. At least we've got it. We've been asked several times about how does it complement other approaches, or how does it integrate? Or like, I mean, as I said, or as Paul also mentioned, as we didn't seek to put another framework on the market or so, but to have really something that is focused on one specific fact, right? The having really this use phase focus, and that it is complementary or as complementary as possible to other approaches. So I think it would be lovely if you could say a few words about where do you see the current landscape of as well, and what are the challenges in measuring impact of such models, and what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, thanks. I think really, relevant question. I think you also have a quite clear approach or adding to the kind of accounting landscape by focusing on the use phase. I think this is something that I've also been saying, or we also see a lot, right? That and the work is surely not done, but the focus at the moment lies rather on the upstream, getting transparent and primary and reliable data for the products that companies purchase in order to be able to report better on inventory, but also inventory reductions, right? While the downstream impact, also because of lack of data access, high volatility in the modeling, and also it's a reflexive flow of information or resources, right? If I go from upstream towards downstream, I kind of follow the materials, I follow the information, I follow commercial kind of flows when I exchange data, when I try to measure, when I try to engage. While when I try to do that on the downstream, I always need information that has to come back into the value chain, right? If I sell an electric a battery that is going to be used in an EV later on, right? I need to. It's not like the battery seller that talks to the EV producer, which is the usual way, and then shares the information about the product. But suddenly, me as the EV battery producer, I need information about running hours, about user behavior, and so on and so forth, which is unconventional to say the least, right? And we don't really have a data infrastructure that supports this type of information flow and or resource flow for that matter, right? So I think that's a big challenge, and therefore we need to shed more light into the use phase to also be able to position it as or show the leverage that use phase interventions can have. That's more on the practitioner side, right? And then on the other hand, and what I already mentioned in my intro statement, right, is the harmonization of metrics and methodologies and frameworks here, right? So this is now nascent. We really also take it as a chance as WBCSD by saying, 20, 30 years ago when GHG accounting on the inventory side started, the landscape kind of emerged and broadened, right? And here we really have a chance to ensure convergence, consistency, harmonization across metrics early on, right? So there's also a mindset shift, I think, needed to even stronger double down on these efforts for harmonization, for convergence, and also for then linking it into existing standards, right? We don't need now an avoided emissions or intervention-based standard, but it should already be complementary and best case addressed by existing inventory standard setters or dominant, TCFD, ISSB, but GHGP and ISO probably, right? So from a practitioner perspective, I don't have to go back to, having my 18 tabs of methodologies open to figure out which one to use, right? So these are probably a few, I would say, kind of overarching points, especially that methodology part is, of course, one that we try to address, where a lot of new challenges come in, right? Specifically when it comes to modeling a baseline, modeling a counterfactual that, is per definition can't be proved. Of course, I can be very close and do consumer surveys, and I have other data and market average and so on. But essentially, I compare something that happened to something that hasn't happened, right? Which is very different from where we are coming from in GHG accounting. So I think this is also something that requires a certain level of positioning, a certain level of cautious approaches in disclosure, right? What we maybe saw the last 5-10 years, where this has then been also used for greenwashing, for overstating, but mostly due to the lack of comparability and consistency. That's what really led to a lack of credibility of this type of information. So yeah, maybe I would leave it at that. So I would say I think the use phase focus very important, but then also it comes to improving data infrastructure and also aligning consumer engagement approaches. So we are working now, for example, with a digital cohort in our membership, right, that are sitting usually more downstream, are not necessarily the ones that produce the EV batteries or the electric train engines, but more the ones that track if people travel less and so on and so forth, or use their heating, cooling less. So we're also trying to understand how can we now use this information by engaging consumers in a way that lets us maximize what we hope to achieve with this intervention, right? I think that's also something where it's more on the storytelling, as I said, consumer engagement, whether defaulting works better than, highlighting sustainability impact, or what other kind of ways this can be used in order to really ensure that the certain assumptions that we all take when modeling this type of impact are actually being realized. Plus then really finding ways to monitor, validate, trace that impact, because that's the other large black box if we look deeper into use phase.
I would love to have a follow-up on this particularly, because of course, I mean the data unavailability, let's say, about the use phase is a major problem, right? And sometimes I feel like that people are focusing on the material footprint, on the product carbon footprint, and then having some estimates, because at least that data is somehow available. And use phase data is even more notoriously unknown. As you said, like there's 70% of unused devices in Germany. This is, I think it's pretty similar for other European Union countries, where we just don't know what happens with these devices. And if you have, then you have the second problem that even that you have to have consumer engagement data, which is also not necessarily reliable, because there's a spread between what people say and what people do. So what's your perspective on how can we get more into more closer to reality and have more data on this, because all the standards and methods and so don't cannot be applied if we don't have any data to fill this in. So how do you deal with this in the other approaches?
Yeah, so we discussed finance briefly before this session, right? But I think from both investors as well as corporates, there must be, and we see that, probably we'll hear from Stefan from Panasonic, for example, in a bit. But I think there is really a need to go beyond, beyond compliance efforts on getting access to that in terms of being credible about claims, but also in terms of having credible information to influence climate strategies, right? So I think there are, and that's on the corporate side, and the financing side as well, right? If you would think of green finance, transition finance instruments, when they invest, whether it's an independent entity, startup or scale up, or a new, factory of a low carbon solution of a large multinational, there will also be a certain need to verify that these changes have happened, right? We cannot just make modeled. So I think that's one. So compliance and regulation will in the end bring that, but also just public attention to be clear about what type of claims are being made and what type of impact is being attributed to certain investments or strategic decisions. But I also believe, as climate action and climate strategies mature, that this information will just be key. And we see that in the avoided emission space a lot, that, BU heads, product owners, and yeah, again, probably Lenovo, Panasonic, you have a lot to share on that end, but they start to engage all of a sudden with climate accounting, right? They say, hey, this is something that actually lets me more reliably prove the benefit of my product, right? And I need that. I just cannot always tell the story without anything that is tangible, that are in the end numbers on, numbers to share, right? So I think that's another kind of pull, right? So that the better you want to market these type of products, the better your data needs to be. And again, I mentioned the data consumer engagement part, where there are also a few technical elements, relatively simple ways of harmonization. You know, how do you structure that data? How do you exchange that type of data across organizations, across ERP platforms? I think is one question. Incentives within the value chain. And then, of course, also, especially since we talk use phase, compliance with GDPR, privacy rights, right, which is also a very a topic where of course we need to be careful to drive that into the right direction. You know, now upstream towards downstream, the data sharer basically is the data owner in many senses. If we go now downstream back towards upstream, the people that share data may not fully be aware of it. So we need to ensure that this is of course done in a way that is GDPR, but also privacy and consumer
that's also
privacy
an important topic. If you remember the story of the recent data leakage of the automotive company, the people could tell where the cars have been and when and exactly down to the very single car. Stefan, so Marvin already threw the ball 3 times into your direction. So what's your perspective? Like, what do you know about your products once they leave your factory? And what kind of pull on the topic do you see? Like what is it that stakeholders want to know about, like from you, or like how do you deal with it, with these different demands?
Well, Panasonic is a very diverse company, so we have a really broad portfolio on products. To some products, it's very little what we know after we have launched the product, but to some, we have a better close B2B customer relationship. But in principle, I guess it's very important, and this is also what highlights maybe the result of your study, to combine the production phase with the use phase. Because for companies, especially if they have to make some investment, they have to be fact-based and not based on emotion. And this is why data available is so crucial. Already today, we see recycled materials in products which are already available next to the same product with native origin materials. So already today, to some of the product categories, the comparison to more environmentally friendly products can be accepted by the end customer. But for us as a manufacturing company, the customer benefit or customer satisfaction is key. And this is why data across the life cycle is extremely important. And when you capture such kind of data, it's important that such data is available to everybody, because every company is just one piece in the entire value chain. And then it's captured in a non-competitive way, right? And this is why we see the European market as a very important driver to collect and create a scheme where companies can share information in a non-competitive way to set up some of the business models on top, right? Because if the data ownership remains with a single company, you might run into issues that each of the stakeholder in the value chain cannot make a science or fact-based decision for their investment. And here Europe is clearly the blueprint, what might be beneficial, not only in Europe, but maybe also in other regions in the world. And each company can only take action on their own scope, right? In Japan, for instance, we also do recycling. We maintain our own recycling plants, but this is a very difficult business to expand globally. So this is why whenever we have some experience, bringing such kind of experience to other regions is a big challenge, which requires a strong level of collaboration. And such kind of scheme like you have established and you proposed helps also to quantify some of the potential impact. And this is very beneficial for large manufacturing companies, because based on emotions, of course, you can stimulate some discussion, but if you really want to go for business and want to scale up some of the business, it has to be backed up by real data.
Yeah.
And of course, we have a lot of IoT devices, and we can de facto, we could capture a lot of information, but based on GDPR and everything else, it's first very difficult, and second, it's proprietary. So whenever you have some information about your products across the life cycle, it's not standardized in a way that it's really beneficial for the entire value chain. Right?
And how do you see the standardization processes there? And do you see differences between the world regions or the countries?
Europe certainly has a very good movement on this because there is big support in harmonizing and making a legally backed up market on data, right? And secondly, you have major involvement of all standard stakeholders. And this is in particular true to set up a minimum set of data which needs to be shared. And on top, you can eventually make some additional return on investment. Yeah. This is certainly where Europe is driving this kind of information exchange across the supply chain and value chain. And the battery passport at the moment is the first one, which will be brought to the European market starting from 2027. And this will also enable some of the business models which make use of the data. Even if you don't have direct access to the product, there will be some opportunities later on.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Interesting. I mean, James, I think it's also like you're also a highly collaborative company, if I might say, right? So you also, it's not that you seek to implement everything on your own from the business model to the very end, but you also like have like built yourself quite a network. What's your perspective on the collaboration and also that for these models and then realizing them?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important, right? I think you know, Lenovo as a company, we're you know, as within the kind of a overall PC space, we're sort of relatively vertically integrated, right? In terms of our owning some much more manufacturing than maybe some others in the industry. Like some of the other Asian OEMs are similar, right? But maybe some of the other OEMs less so. So I think that does help in terms of we can have when you look at the upstream emissions, we have it's easier for us to get that data than it could be necessarily because we own quite a lot of it. And also for some of the interventions that we make to try and, you know, decarbonize our products. So for instance, using recycled materials, which we have a large program around. We have sort of 90% recycled packaging by this year as our target. We're using recycled carbon fiber. We're using recycled rare earths now, recycled aluminium in our tablets, you know, all of those kind of programs, that kind of thing, it makes it a little bit easier to sort of do that kind of thing and to get the data for it. So sort of upstream, we're in a relatively good place, but it's still difficult to make sure we're collecting all of that data. Downstream, yeah, again, this is part of the whole effort. We obviously work, you know, a lot of our orders are fulfilled through our channel partners who will make sales, who do fulfillment for us, or through retailers. You know, only a proportion of our business actually goes directly through the company. So you know, a key priority of ours is anything that we do internally around data and around sustainability data is how we make that available to all of our channel partners in the you know, in the right way, like you say, Stefan, in terms of sometimes the real granularity is difficult, GDPR and just general data collection and data management areas, but we do sort of strive to have good data across everything that we sell in all of our products. And you know, partly actually that tool I talked about as well, that Lissa tool that we have in place, can help with other things on that where we have need for data in other spaces. So for instance, for RFPs or for customer conversations, and making sure that that's kind of easy to get hold of, because you know, I think with a lot of this, it's, you know, you have the sort of the data collection, then the sort of you have the, which is one tricky part. Then you have to have the sort of the right governance and the right calculation on top of that, and then the management is also another difficulty, right? And then the access, you sort of have to have all of those layers working well to get the sort of full system, system working. And you know, it's an ongoing push for us, and I think for a lot of companies. Prior to this, I was in consulting and I worked at Deloitte, and we did a lot of work on sustainability data. So I have seen sort of where it is across the industry a little bit as well. And I think, you know, it's really just a huge emerging demand. And I think over the last few years, a lot of companies have seen the demand for good verified sustainability data really grow. And a lot of companies are putting in place this, you know, good structures to be able to deal with that.
In general, so now I know was quite active in the circular services, but if we look especially at the downstream part of in general offering refurbishment, refurbished devices, or both B2C, B2B, and also to offer rental services or other circular service. What's your perspective? What's the role of the OEM like? Because there are a lot of different actors around, and so what's the role of the OEM?
No, it's a good question. I think, there's such a huge opportunity here, right? I really liked your market study that you did because obviously we look at this market as well. I think you said that in Germany, was it 30% or 30% of companies had bought refurbished IT,
Yeah.
and it was actually some of the larger companies. And that is a trend that we do see starting to emerge as well. And I think, really, I think that there's a few things that need to be in place really for this to kind of work, right? For us to really move to circular economy in our space, the kind of B2B laptop and PC market and other devices. We have mobile phone servers, but just to focus on the PCs because that's been one of the focuses of this report. The first thing needs to be in place is the demand. Then I think is having the kind of right offer in the market, and then the data is kind of the third one, right? So I think on the demand side, we're starting to see the demand. We're definitely seeing some more leading companies putting in targets around circular IT. So we're seeing some companies where they have a sort of 20% target to use refurbished devices. There's obviously the procurement laws in France, which also call for 20% refurbished devices, although we've also seen that it's not always as fully enforced as strictly as it could be. And there are quite a few loopholes, but it's there and it's growing, and we see that going. So we see that demand starting. But I think if you were to see a number of players in the market sort of come together and put in place, a 20% target, for instance, on circular IT,
Yeah.
I think that's the sort of thing where you would then suddenly really, really see a huge shift in the market, right? And I think then, all of the OEMs would be really fully concentrated on this, as well as the partners that we work with to enable all of this as well. So I think the first is the demand, and I think the more demand is the first thing that really needs to shift, and the more companies can work together on that, I think the better. The second is the offer in the market, and I think there's lots of good offers out there. I think as an OEM, we do have something to bring to that, because you need to be able to bring a product to a company which carries the same risk profile and has the same carries the same quality and meets the same requirements and performance and productivity and all these other areas that a new product does, right? It needs to be as good or if not better. So you need to have that high quality product. We bring it with an OEM warranty, and also you mentioned before about aligning incentives. We're starting to see that our products are being designed in more of a modular fashion for many reasons, to help with repair and all of these different areas, and more interchangeable parts, which is also really helping our refurbishing as well in terms of how we refurbish the devices as well by bringing in the more modular parts. And then the other thing is, in that kind of having that offer, it needs to be very easy of sale. The fulfillment needs to be easy. The SKUs need to be available that companies want. So there's a lot that needs to be in place. And I think that's definitely a combination of OEMs working with channel partners, working with refurbishers, working with others in the market around an ecosystem, but making sure to be able to deliver that good as new, not just product, but service and offering in general. And then I think the last is the data, right? So it's the conversation that we're having today. We need to be able to show as an industry that this is the impact that this has and the difference that this makes, buying a refurbished product, refurbishing, extending the life of your product, reusing at the end of life. We need to be able to confidently show that, right? So as I said before, I often compare the kind of the carbon side to our general sort of sales process. On the sort of price side, how much something's going to cost before you buy it. You get a receipt afterwards. We need to have the same thing in place on the sustainability and carbon side as well. You need to, before you buy it, know how much it's going to save you, and at the end you need to get the receipt to show that that's what's been saved essentially, and that's kind of where we aspire from the data side. So I think with those are the three things that need to be in place, and I think it's an ecosystem play, but I think we do have a role as an OEM in that for sure.
Yeah. Thanks. And maybe a last follow-up question for Marvin before we also can open the floor to questions. I have continue the discussion, but include you all. Because one thing is the whole complexity of measuring this all, but then, and you briefly touched upon this, is the question of allocating it. That if we say that we save, that a certain circular service does have environmental a positive environmental impact, who gets to account for it? Because what we see is typically that, and this is also what is seen in this industry systems map, right? So there is there's a rental company that provides the customer interface and does all the interaction, then works with a logistics provider, then works with a rental provider, with a refurbishment and repair service provider, has the grading processes externalized to a professional grading company, then sells it off to a global trader who then sells it into five different markets. And this is a not so untypical journey of a device. And then the question becomes: so if we save some CO2 or some resources here, who gets to account for that along this value chain? I mean, this is also, of course, typically for other carbon savings, but this is like a very practical question.
Yeah, and also I think it's a very, very important one. I think, I think that probably completes the topics of, the overlap between downstream inventory and intervention,
Yeah.
the topic of modeling baselines, and I think this allocation one, another key one, as like core methodological challenges in this kind of intervention-based context, right? So, and we hear that a lot. I think how we currently approach that from WBCSD side is that we go towards the assessment only on the kind of end solution level, so unallocated, right? So I wouldn't take any proxies or anything in that sense. Say, okay, where we already know in inventory counting, it can be anyway. It's always arbitrary, right? Whether I take economic or physical or whatever kind of base, how many hours the service person spends on it or whatever it may be. So we say, the assessment overall, in order to contribute to harmonization for a specific solution, best for a functional unit, should be like to that level defined and disclosed, right? Should be done unallocated so that the impact can really be, and the methodological approach to an extent compared. At the same time, and we have our updated guidance on avoid emission now forthcoming next month, we include a section on those topics of allocation, but also consolidation. I think they are both key, right? Value chain allocation. So who do I, and especially from, for example, from an investment perspective again, right? Where I want to really say I invest in one specific component producer for heat pumps, right? And I of course somehow want to capture the impact that my investment, for example, has, or as the producer. So we know there is a need for it, for business decision making, for KPIs, for resource allocation. We are quite conservative when it comes to considering this standardized or harmonized or used for disclosure. That we say, hey, there are ways to allocate. This is a bit of a hierarchy how this should be done. Right, take the specific data we mentioned, like smart devices, IoT, where you may be even able to really track it down to the specific contribution. But then, there are different ways to allocate and how you should disclose about it that are more conventional, physical, economic reasoning, and so on and so forth. So that we say there is a hierarchy, what is good allocation, what is good practice in that space, but important not to kind of mingle it up too soon, which means right now, not to mingle it up with the actual disclosure, but this is then really more part of commercial discussions and so on and so forth. And the other part I think that's important to stress is we have an eligibility criterion in our guidance, right? So that would mean that whether it's an end-use solution or a component provider, there is a clear threshold where there should be a contribution should be substantiated. So there must be a clearly reportable, let's say, cause and effect relationship between the impact that is happening and the component. So the cement for a wind park probably that also could be used for streets outside is probably not necessarily a contributor to wind energy, while the producers of the blades, for example, probably are, right? They have a specific product. Without those blades, this wouldn't work with another cement, or that would probably is not so specific to the solution. And on the other part also that there is a clearly decarbonizing impact, so that there is a clear distinction that goes beyond levels of uncertainty compared to the solutions, comparing the solution scenario to the reference scenario, right? So if I crank up my levels of uncertainty a bit and my impact would be gone, then we basically say, okay, that doesn't really meet the threshold of eligibility to claim that your product is a distinct contribution to the realized impact. So it's both. We have this one cross-sector or cross-cutting eligibility criterion consisting of decarbonizing and substantiated impact for a component that wants to make a claim, for example, that an end solution has. And then we have an optional part. It's like if you then go towards allocation, which we know practitioners are doing, this is good practice of how this should be done. But I believe in order to really drive this forward, more rules, solution-specific rules will be needed, similar to PCRs, where you define system boundaries and harmonize them based on consensus. There's always reason to extend it or have them smaller, and they can be very good. But I think in order to create some level of credibility, they must be stronger harmonized, but again, probably more on a solution-specific approach rather than finding a cross-cutting, cross-sectoral way of how this should be done. If somebody of you or here in the meeting has that, I'm more than happy to continue and learn about that. But yeah, big topic and important to continue to work on that. I think we are just starting to do that.
Yeah, super interesting. But yes, you're very right to call upon the room. So I look at Paul, who has monitored the chat a little bit. Maybe you want to raise some questions to our panel, or if you have not written anything down, also feel free to raise your hand. But Paul, do you have some questions?
We have one question from Lucy, who asked about something that James has also touched upon already a little bit. But maybe, Lucy, do you want to say your question? So please unmute yourself.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks again for the very interesting discussion. So I had a question on like the customer's demand on like such like impact assessment as really a driver for this change, and also how to balance like the impact measurement that we know that is very complex and the need for very easy to understand and comparable data for clients. I don't know if you have anything to elaborate on this question. I know that you already talked a bit on it, all of you, but yeah.
Happy to give it
Anyone who wants to give it
first
a
shot.
Yeah.
Who would like to take it? I can.
Oh, James, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry, go ahead, Marvin. You go ahead, sorry.
I think the industry perspective matters more on this one, so let me see if I can compliment you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think definitely there's two things which are kind of pushing the demand for data, and this is probably coming a bit more from my experience in consulting previously at Deloitte, because I saw a bit of a broader swathe of the industry over a number of years. So I think there's probably two factors. There's the first one is customer demand. And I think particularly actually the first place that started to come up was more in the sort of procurement stage, right? So coming from procurement departments and then going into RFPs. So RFPs, I think over the last few years for lots of different B2B products have become sort of more complex in terms of the sustainability data that's needed. And then I think many companies in lots of different industries realized that they then needed to really focus down on what their strategy is for sustainability data and have a sort of a repository for that, and have policies in place, governance and everything needed to be able to do that. So I think that was one of the first pushes was around kind of procurement, and from procurement into companies. I think then the second has definitely been then regulation, with a few things pushing that. So I think the CSRD and reporting and that sort of thing. I think companies are looking to get better data around the products which they're procuring. There's still it can be quite rough cut, but I think a lot of them are investing quite heavily in their sort of data infrastructure, and that includes getting better data about the products they're procuring. So for instance, IT products in our case, which means after procurement or after buying, there's a need for better data around what the kind of impact was from a sustainability perspective of those products. And mostly in terms of impact, it's mostly been around carbon. I think we're probably starting to see some emerging changes. I think there's more around, there are more requests around materials and around circularity, around things like recycled content, around material use and all these different areas. I think that's starting to come in. I think this will continue to evolve, and the demand will only get stronger and stronger. And I think, again, it will continue to be pushed by regulation and by customer demand. I think regulation, Stefan already spoke to this, but digital product passports is going to be a major push in terms of the need for data. I led our digital product passport offering globally at Deloitte, so focused on that quite a lot. And there's, that is definitely going to push the need for data at a product level further going forward. So I think that regulatory drive again will probably just push ahead as we go forward in terms of data needed. But yeah, I think most companies are looking to do this, and it's 100% demand and regulation driven.
Stefan, is it similar from your perspective?
Well, yeah, I guess for a manufacturing company to share data, it's a little bit odd because their primary intention is a business model called make and sell. So usually you make a product and then you sell it to the market. And this does not fundamentally change actually. And if you look at all these kind of platform economies, which had been commoditized the products, even made it more difficult to differentiate on the product level, right? And this way, there's an intrinsic conflict of interest when manufacturing companies are asked to share data, right? Because usually when you share data, it increases the risk on your product, right? Either it's on the raw materials used, or if you open an API that it can be controlled from outside, that you run into some price competition for a commoditized market. So from a general manufacturer perspective, data is being something which we have, of course, right, to some extent, but do not want to share so openly, right, because it's sensitive. And this is why some of the data, if you go public, the data economy has to be rule-based. And this is what we see also for the European market. You have a rule-based data economy, which is currently being prepared by the Digital Single Market of the European Commission. And this is also where the DPP on the product side will be complemented to some data exchange to which manufacturing companies maintain ownership about their data, even if they share, right? And this is a big move forward to make circular economy also an opportunity for manufacturing companies to expand in the value chain. Because at the moment, we are somehow limited based to new legal constraints due to economic reasons. But if we have these building blocks available on the European market, I guess they will have a major impact globally.
Yeah.
Maybe I can just one or two thoughts on that. I think Stefan, one super important point you mentioned is like, right, these kind of federated or distributed kind of data models, right? And we see them now slowly emerging in the B2B context. Maybe something also to think about in the B2C context, right? How can I enable consumers to be better in control of their data? I think at the moment this is still lacking, but we also, I think, see many consumer brands, improving that, right? Making it a bit more toolified and almost gamified, what you share and what you get in return, thinking of transaction-based impact assessment in consumer banking, right? Or retail banking, which is probably an emerging field for that, right? Where there is also a certain incentive as a consumer to benefit from that level of transparency, while the company / the value chain sustainability strategies can be improved. So I think that type of as a federated, distributed, multi-party approaches to some multi-party computing approaches to data ownership, and these more updated data governance approaches will be, I think, key to drive this forward. And then just also when I initially opened the mic, that we have, for example, right now launching a series of workshops with our members and WRI, who have done a quite interesting study on consumer shifts on various kind of consumer footprints, right? So, but also can play back from that type of discussion with WRI, but also our really advanced members in that space. I think nobody has found the golden formula yet, right? So it really goes from these more engaging, gamified to some who just say, hey, we don't even, it's the same product. We just default the sustainability option now, or we just default switch on our sustainability software in the background, and nobody really knows about it. And that actually works best in terms of uptake, right? So I think there's also still some more work and effort to be done to understand that better and turn it into a competitive advantage rather than something that seems like a nuisance in order to confirm certain ESG models that run in the background. I can paste the report here from WI also in the chat for participants.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I just wanted to let Ronja maybe ask her a question as well. We already briefly started to discuss it in the chat. It's about the allocation topic. Ronja, would you like to phrase your question here?
Yes, I can. So there are a huge variation of allocation methods in doing LCAs currently. And depending on which method you follow, you will incentivize different business models. So as you talked about the cutoff, that would actually be interesting for someone who's rebuying devices, because then they come without a footprint. However, that wouldn't be incentivized closed loop system where the ownership stays with the same company. And I think at the moment there's a huge discussion, but also a huge potential, let's say, as, for example, taxes or tax allocation systems encourage waste, because then if it's depreciated is the English word, then it hasn't any waste for value for the company anymore. We should avoid going the same route, and we can take some decisions by deciding on what location methods we select. So I was thinking, like, whoever feels having an answer to that, what you see, which allocation methods incentivize which decisions or which business models.
Anyone has a...
Or do you have a favorite one, maybe also from your point of view?
I addressed this already before. I'm not sure, Stefan, James, if you want to jump in first.
Usually, if you have some obligation to make a life cycle assessment, you will take whatever your customer asks you to do, right? So if you have a compliance need to enter a certain market, you will use a certain standard, ISO 14000 or whatever is applicable to make your business. And this is what I mean. From a business perspective, customer satisfaction is most important. And of course, you want to value your product as good as possible, right? And this also means that whenever you have a specific life cycle assessment method available, as a stakeholder in the value chain, you have to implement. So a preference depends on the business. So if I look at because we are supporting group-wide, each business has a different standard. So, and this comes back what Marvin has said before, you have to have a broad range of raw data available, and you apply whenever it is necessary. And you don't consolidate already at an early step, but the available data should be available for a large multinational company doing business worldwide in a as best as possible way that you can comply to whatever is necessary due to business requirements and or compliance requirements. But it's not a real response, sorry.
From a standards development or methodology development perspective, only I think, first of all, your question I think is very relevant to many of the discussions that we have at the moment. And, we really also have a few, let's say, default approaches. So we sanity check, like also in our forthcoming updated guidance, we address more these kind of recycling examples and recycling use cases. We also work on solution-specific assessment rules for built environment and ag and food, where, for example, regenerative renewable insulation materials is one case, right, where we also have this challenge, right? Like this is a 30, 40, 50-year deployment time, but you already today want to kind of show the superiority in terms of end-of-life treatment of a product compared to the market mix, right? Like, so you're, of course, kind of scenario modeling and glimpsing a bit into the future, while at the same time trying to be robustly rooted and trying to develop transparent, but also a repetitively applicable framework that that brings these kind of impacts to the fore. So yeah, not an easy task. I think for us, really always a check also against recommendations we come forward with. A lot of solution-specific debates needed, and lastly, I think that's also the message I brought in the beginning. In the end, it also really depends on existing inventory approaches and how these topics are treated there, and not to kind of be redundant or fully counterintuitive towards already existing, right? So it's not like a nice empty space in which we can shape this up, but I think we also need to be aware, closed loop, recycled content, what that kind of implication that would have on an inventory, and what now the implications this have on emerging intervention-based approaches.
Yeah. And I think it's also in the end a discussion with other stakeholders looking at the direction of regulators, for example, where we need to of course make sure that the selection of these methodologies is coherent with the incentives that the regulator wants to implement. We are coming to the end of this webinar. That's why I'm intervening. Thank you very much for this very nice discussion, very interesting thoughts, and I think we're at a very deep level into this topic with the three of you. So it's really fantastic. I just wanted to say a couple of things about our next steps. Share my screen. Go. So if you are interested in following up on this with us, please get in touch. That's the one thing. And the second thing is we would like to invite you to our webinar, which is part of the current CSEL program. This next Tuesday's topic is the global trade and e-waste. So also a topic that has a lot to do with data and availability of data and data gathering, let's say, along the value chain. So please be invited. You can register directly through this QR code. We look forward to seeing you there or in one of our next events. And with that, thank you very much again for attending this webinar. Thank you very much to our three fantastic panelists. And on behalf of Circularity, I wish you a very good afternoon.
Yes, thank you, James, Marvin, Stefan, for joining and for the discussion. And thank you, everyone, for joining. And looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thanks a lot. And
Thank
good day to
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, hello.